Right now, like literally as you're listening to this, your brain might be reacting to a slightly tense Slack message
Yeah.
or, a missed text from someone, and you're having the exact same life or death chemical panic as if you were being chased by a predator in the wild.
It's wild how that happens.
It is. I mean, we live in this modern world, but we're operating with this ancient neurological hardware. And while most of us treat physical health as something we actively maintain, right? Like going to the gym, eating well,
Right.
we tend to treat our mental health like a visit to the emergency room.
Yeah.
We really only pay attention to it when something is, actively bleeding or broken.
Yeah, and it's a fundamentally reactive approach. We wait for a total system failure or a crisis rather than building the daily infrastructure you need to prevent that crisis from happening in the first place.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Our mission for you today is to decode the hidden signals of your own mental health and your relationships. We're going to look at how you can move from merely surviving those exhausting, racing internal thoughts to actually fostering genuine, resilient connections with your partner and your kids. We are essentially going to treat proactive mental health like a mental gym.
Which requires a really crucial shift in perspective
Mm,
because knowledge like this is truly most valuable when it's applied.
right.
So as we walk through the mechanisms of the mind today, I want to encourage you to critically examine your own daily habits. Like, how are you training your nervous system when you aren't in the middle of a crisis?
Yeah, to help us build out this mental gym, we've spent the week going through this incredibly dense, but like really fascinating stack of clinical videos, articles, and therapy guides from the River North Counseling Group in Chicago.
It's a great collection of
Yeah, it
sources.
really is. These are the practical, real world tools that professionals use. But before we can begin to connect with anyone else, our partners, our children, our colleagues, we really have to confront the hidden internal scripts running in our own minds. And the sources start with a dynamic that I think a lot of people listening will recognize, even if they've never really had a name for it. It looks like traditional success, but internally, it functions as a secret burden. We're talking about high functioning anxiety.
Yeah, and it's an incredibly deceptive dynamic. High-functioning anxiety often flies completely under the radar because it's masked by high achievement.
Mm-hmm.
To the outside world, this person looks like the rock star employee or, the
Yeah.
neighborhood's most organized parent. They're hyper-productive, they anticipate every problem, and they never miss a deadline.
Right, but the engine driving that productivity isn't like ambition or passion, it's pure fear.
Exactly.
The sources explain that behind that pristine facade, there is usually this crippling imposter syndrome, an extreme form of perfectionism, and relentless people pleasing,
Yeah, they can't delegate tasks because they desperately need absolute control over their environment.
just to manage the chaos inside their own heads.
Precisely. And one of the primary cognitive distortions driving that internal chaos is catastrophizing. Evolutionary biology actually designed our brains to do this.
Right, because thousands of years ago, assuming the rustle in the bushes was a deadly tiger, I mean, that kept you alive.
Yes. Today, however, our ancient threat detection system misfires. The brain treats an unlikely worst-case scenario like your boss asking for a quick chat as an absolute certainty of disaster.
Okay, let's unpack this because the clinical guides from River North point to cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, as the gold standard for restructuring this kind of thinking.
Mhm.
And they outline a specific 6-step process for this. It's catching the thought, naming the catastrophe, examining the evidence for and against it,
Right.
finding the most realistic outcome, checking if you have the resources to cope, and then finally forming a balanced thought.
That's the framework, yeah.
But like, if my brain is convinced I'm about to be fired and I'm in full-blown fire alarm panic mode over an email, I'm realistically not going to stop, sit down with a journal, and logically chart out 6 clinical steps. That feels impossible when your heart is literally beating out of your chest.
What's fascinating here is the psychological concept of building muscle memory. A very common misconception is that you're supposed to deploy these CBT tools for the very first time during a massive panic attack.
Wait, you aren't.
You don't. You practice them when the stakes are incredibly low. You practice when the toast burns, not when the kitchen is actively on fire.
Oh, wow. So you have to train the brain while it's still relatively calm?
Exactly. You practice catching the minor thoughts.
Yeah.
Say you make a typo in a presentation. You catch the thought, everyone thinks I'm incompetent. You name the catastrophe, I'm going to lose my job.
Right.
Then you actively examine the evidence. Have you ever been fired over a typo? No. Is your overall performance review strong? Yes.
So you're forcing your brain to walk through these steps over minor daily stresses.
Yes. And by doing that, you are literally carving a new neural pathway. You're teaching your brain to pause and assess rather than just react. Over time, when a larger panic hits, that analytical pathway is already wired and ready to be used.
That makes a lot of sense. You're basically building the infrastructure ahead of time.
Exactly.
But there's a biological reality we have to acknowledge here too, because sometimes we're so stressed or so physically exhausted that we simply cannot outthink our anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the sources emphasize this heavily. When cognitive restructuring isn't enough, we have to look at the brain as a physical organ that operates by physiological rules. We have to look at how to hack the nervous system directly.
Because cognitive tools are wonderful, but they require the prefrontal cortex, the logical reasoning part of your brain to be online.
Right.
When you're severely triggered, that part of your brain essentially goes offline and your primitive survival centers just take over.
So you can't logic your way out of it.
No. In those moments, the most immediate, accessible tool to shift your physiology is your breath.
And the sources highlight a specific technique called the physiological sigh. It's 2 inhales through the nose, so 1 normal breath, followed immediately by a quick secondary inhale to fully expand the lungs, and then 1 long, slow exhale through the mouth.
Right.
Let's break down the actual mechanism there, because it's not just a distraction technique, right? It's like a biological override.
It is biological override. That specific double inhale breathing pattern pops open the tiny air sacs in your lungs called alveoli, which tend to collapse when we are stressed and breathing shallowly.
Oh, interesting.
But more importantly, the long exhale directly stimulates the vagus nerve. You want to think of the vagus nerve simply. It's like a massive communication superhighway running from your brainstem down through your chest and into your abdomen.
Okay.
When you stimulate it with that long exhale, it acts as an emergency brake for your fight or flight response. It instantly shifts your nervous system into a parasympathetic state, which is our natural rest and digest mode.
So it's sending a mechanical signal to the brain that says we are safe. The sources also mention box breathing, inhaling for 4 counts, holding for 4, exhaling for 4, and holding empty for 4. That physically rebalances the carbon dioxide and oxygen levels in the blood to signal safety. And then there is progressive muscle relaxation, created by Dr. Edmund Jacobson in the 1920s, where you intentionally tense and then completely release muscle groups to trigger the body's natural relaxation response.
And what all of these techniques share is that they bypass the racing thoughts entirely. They use the physical body to force the brain back to a baseline of calm.
And speaking of the physical body, it's not just how we breathe that dictates our mental state, right? It's what we are physically consuming.
Oh, absolutely.
I always thought of the human gut primarily as just like a digestion center. But looking through this research, it's actually functioning more like a massive chemical manufacturing plant for the brain. We're talking about the gut-brain axis.
The connection is profound and largely ignored in standard conversations about anxiety. Over 90% of your body's serotonin, which is a critical neurotransmitter for regulating your mood, your sleep, and preventing depression, is manufactured right there in your gut, not in your brain.
Wait, 90%? So the physical food you eat is literally constructing the chemical building blocks of your emotional state.
It really is.
The sources point out that omega-3s found in foods like salmon actively reduce inflammation in the gut. If your gut is inflamed from a poor diet, it essentially blocks that serotonin pipeline.
Yeah.
And folate, found in leafy greens like spinach, directly supports dopamine production.
Precisely. If that internal chemical plant is out of balance, your mental baseline is already compromised before you even face a stressful event. And when we're physically exhausted and chemically depleted, we become highly susceptible to external traps.
Which leads directly into our digital diets.
Yes.
The dreaded digital detox. The sources point out that the constant pinging of notifications keeps our stress hormones perpetually elevated. Now, the clinical guides emphasize that a detox doesn't mean throwing your phone in a river and living in the woods.
Thankfully.
Right. It means utilizing grayscale mode to make the screen less stimulating, batching your emails so you only check them twice a day, and creating strict screen-free zones in your home. But let's be real for a second. When it's midnight, I'm exhausted, my chemical baseline is wrecked, and I am deep into a doom-scrolling trance in bed.
We've all been there.
The idea of logically batching my emails or initiating a progressive muscle relaxation routine feels utterly impossible. Like, how do we break the digital trance to even start relaxing?
Well, that trance state is a very real neurological phenomenon. What's happening is that the blue light emitting from your screen is tricking your brain into thinking it's daytime, suppressing your melatonin.
Simultaneously, the unpredictable nature of social media or email provides random dopamine hits. This combination actively hijacks your amygdala, which is your brain's primitive alarm bell. It keeps you in a state of hyperarousal.
So my brain thinks it needs to stay awake and stay on high alert for danger, even though I'm literally just looking at a screen in the dark.
Yes. So the goal at midnight isn't to force a massive, heroic behavioral shift. The goal is simply to introduce a mindful pause.
Okay.
You don't even have to put the phone down immediately. You just have to build awareness. You shift from autopilot to simply observing yourself, noticing my jaw is clenched, my breathing is shallow, and I'm endlessly scrolling is the critical first step.
Awareness.
Awareness acts as the wedge in the door, breaking the hypnotic loop of the amygdala.
And this is where the deep dive takes a really crucial turn. Because once we understand how dysregulated our own internal nervous systems can get, we inevitably start to see what happens when two dysregulated nervous systems collide in a household.
Yes, this brings us to romantic relationships, the so-called roommate phase, and the dreaded repeat fight.
It's a trajectory most couples experience, really. When you have two people who are stressed, exhausted, and operating in a state of hyperarousal, communication almost always results in gridlock. The sources detail a classic relational pattern known as the reach-withdrawal loop.
Right, this is the dynamic where one partner feels disconnected, so they desperately push for answers or engagement they're reaching.
Exactly.
But the other partner feels criticized or overwhelmed by that intensity, so their nervous system shuts down and they pull away to cool off, they withdraw.
Which naturally leaves the reaching partner feeling abandoned and panicked, causing them to push even harder.
And the other pulls away more.
Which in turn causes the withdrawing partner to retreat even further. It is a terrible, self-perpetuating dance.
And inside that dance, couples end up having the exact same fight over and over again, just with different scenery. The River North materials clarify that a repeat fight is rarely about the surface topic.
Almost never.
Right. If you're arguing about your spouse failing to send a text message that they would be late coming home, you aren't actually arguing about the clock or the text. You're arguing about a hidden core meaning.
Yes, the late text is just a proxy. In the reaching partner's mind, the failure to text translates directly to the core belief: I do not matter to you. You do not consider me.
To break that terrible loop, the therapy guides heavily emphasize the concept of boundaries, but they make a very sharp, very important distinction between a boundary and an ultimatum. So what does this all mean? Because if an ultimatum is essentially looking at your partner and saying, you must do X or else I will punish you, a boundary is more like handing someone your internal operating manual. It's saying, here is my personal capacity. If the volume of this